You know what's ironic? We live in the most connected era of human history. We have more tools to communicate, more words at our disposal, more platforms to be seen on than any generation before us. And yet, more people feel profoundly lonely inside their relationships than ever before. More couples are sleeping in the same bed, living in the same house, sharing the same life, and feeling like strangers. More people are having conversations every single day and walking away from them feeling like they weren't really there. That irony, the gap between what relationship looks like on the outside and what they feel like on the inside, is exactly what this podcast exists to explore. Welcome to Relationship Ironies of the World We Live in. I am Swati Mukherjee, a relationship coach with 15 years of experience as a HR and a coach, working with individuals and couples who are navigating the beautiful, baffling, contradictory terrain of human connection. Here's what makes this show different. I don't just share advice. I tell stories, real stories, the kind that feels uncomfortably familiar because they are built from the patterns I see again and again in my coaching practice. The characters may be composite and the names changed, but the dynamics, those are as real as it gets. And every story I tell you is backed by something deeper than opinion. I draw on psychology, attachment theory, neuroscience, depth psychology, behavioral science. I pull from some of the most fascinating experiments and studies ever conducted on human relationships. From research labs in Stockholm to therapy rooms in New York to social experiments run in the streets of Tokyo. Because here's what I believe. The most powerful way to understand yourself and the people you love is not through a list of tips. It's through a story that makes you stop and think, wait, that's me. That's us. That moment of recognition, that's where the real change begins. So if you have ever felt deeply misunderstood by someone who swears they were listening, this show is for you. If you have ever loved someone and still felt alone, this show is for you. If you have ever looked at your relationship and thought, we shouldn't be struggling this much, this show is for you. Hit follow, tell a friend, send this to the person in your life who you wish understood you better. Because the conversation this podcast starts are the kind of conversations that change things. Now let's get into today's story. Nadia talked for 20 minutes straight. And I mean straight. No interruptions, no one cutting her off. Her partner, Daniel, sat across from her the entire time, eyes on her, nodding, completely present. 20 minutes, and when she finally stopped, she looked at him and said, "You never listen to me." Now I know what you might be thinking, that doesn't make sense. And honestly, the first time I heard a version of this story in my coaching practice, I thought the same thing. But here's what I've learned after years of working with couples. Being heard and being listened to are two completely different things. And most of us have never been taught the difference. Today's episode is one I've been wanting to make for a long time, because this particular dynamic, this gap between listening and being heard, might be the single most misunderstood source of disconnection in relationships. Before I tell you what actually happened between Nadia and Daniel, I want you to picture the scene. They've been together for 6 years. They met in their late 20s, both ambitious, both warm people, both genuinely in love. But somewhere around year 4, something started to shift. It wasn't dramatic. There was no big betrayal, no crisis moment. It was quieter than that. Nadia started to feel invisible. Not ignored exactly. Daniel showed up. He was there. He remembered birthdays. He asked about her day. But Nadia had this persistent, gnawing feeling that when she really spoke about the things that mattered, she might as well have been talking to a wall. Daniel, for his part, was baffled. He told me in one of our early sessions, I listen to everything she says. I can repeat it back to her word for word. And he wasn't lying. I tested him. He could. So what was going wrong? That's the question this episode is built around. And the answer, I promise you, is going to change how you show up in every important conversation for the rest of your life. About 3 months into working with Nadia and Daniel, I tried something I call the listening experiment. It's simple in structure, profound in what it reveals. I asked Nadia to talk, uninterrupted, for 20 minutes about something that had been weighing on her, something real, something that mattered. I told Daniel, no questions, no responses, no advice, just be there. Now, Daniel is someone who, and I say this with genuine respect, has been conditioned his whole life to be a solver. He grew up in a household where problems were meant to be fixed, not felt, where silence was awkward, where the way you showed love was by doing something. And he did what he always does. He listened. He leaned in. He nodded. He maintained eye contact. He tracked every word. He was performing quite genuinely what most of us would call good listening. And Nadia talked. She talked about work stress, about feeling overlooked, about a comment her mother had made that still stung 3 weeks later. She talked about a dream she had had that had unsettled her. She talked about feeling like she was always the one carrying the emotional weight of their relationship. 20 minutes. Then I stopped her. And I asked one simple question. Nadia, in this moment, do you feel heard? She paused and then quietly she said no. Daniel looked like I had pulled the floor out from under him. Here's what was happening. Daniel was receiving information. He was processing Nadia's words the way a very attentive student processes a lecture. He could take notes, he could summarize, he could probably have written an essay on everything she said. But Nadia wasn't looking for a transcript. She wasn't delivering information, she was looking for contact. There's a term I use with clients. It comes from the world of depth psychology, but I have adapted it for relationship work. And that term is resonance. Resonance isn't about what you hear. It's about whether the person speaking can feel that their words have landed somewhere inside you. It's the difference between talking at a mirror and talking to someone who is moved. And Daniel, though no fault of his own, through years of emotional conditioning, had become a very polished mirror. Let me break this down into something you can actually use. In my coaching practice, I talk about 3 levels of listening. Most people live at level 1 their whole lives and never even know that other levels exist. Level 1 is listening to respond. This is the most common kind. You are hearing the other person, but somewhere in the back of your mind, you are already formulating what you are going to say next. You're scanning for the moment it becomes your turn. You might be doing this completely unconsciously. Most people are. Daniel, early in his work with me, was a level 1 listener disguised as a level 2. He had suppressed the response impulse. He had trained himself not to interrupt, but internally he was still waiting for that part he could fix. Level 2, listening to understand. This is where most good communicators live. You're genuinely trying to comprehend what's being said. You ask clarifying questions, you paraphrase, you are curious. This is real progress, and it's where a lot of communication advices stop. Here's the problem. Understanding is still fundamentally a cognitive act. And the person in front of you, when they're talking about something that matters, they're not operating from their cognitive mind. They are operating from somewhere much deeper. Level 3, listening to be changed. This is the level that creates that felt sense of being heard. It's when you let what the other person is saying actually move through you. When you allow yourself to be affected, when you don't just understand the words, you feel the weight of them. You feel the loneliness behind the story about the mother's comment. You feel the exhaustion behind the phrase, I'm always the one carrying it. You don't just get it intellectually, something in you shifts. And here's the remarkable thing about level 3 listening: the other person can feel it. They don't know how they know, but they know. Because resonance is a two body experience. I want to come back to Nadia and Daniel's story because their story doesn't end with that experiment. After that session, after Nadia said she didn't feel heard, and after I watched Daniel sit with that discomfort, I turned to him and I asked him something I knew was going to land hard. I said, Daniel, while Nadia was talking, what were you feeling? Long pause. Then he said, I was trying not to feel anything. I thought that was the point. I thought I was supposed to just take it in. And there it was. That one sentence cracked open the whole case. Daniel had learned somewhere along the way that a good listening meant emotional neutrality, that being present meant managing yourself out of the equation, that love, expressed through listening, looked like steadiness, like being unaffected. What Nadia needed was the opposite. She didn't need Daniel to fall apart. She didn't need him to make it about himself. But she desperately needed, some signal that her words had touched him, that the loneliness she described had registered somewhere in his chest, not just his brain, that she wasn't just depositing words into a vault. When I explained this to Daniel, I watched something happen to his face that I only see in the room where something truly lands. He got quiet. Not the managed quiet, the real quiet. And then he said, slowly turning to Nadia, I think I have been so afraid of making your pain worse that I haven't let myself actually feel it with you. Nadia started to cry, not because the problem was solved, but because for the first time in years, she felt he was actually there. The moment, that single unscripted moment, did more for their relationships than 6 months of communication techniques. So why do so many of us end up like Daniel? It's not a character flaw. It's not a lack of love. It's almost always rooted in early learning about what emotions are for and what they mean about you. If you grew up in a home where emotional expression was seen as weakness or drama or burden, you learn to manage. You learn that being the steady one, the logical one, the solution oriented one was safer. Maybe it was even praised. And then you brought that skill, because it is a skill, into your most intimate relationships. And it worked until it didn't. Until the person you love started to feel like they were talking to a very composed, very competent stranger. For others, the pattern is different. Maybe you grew up in a home where someone else's emotions were overwhelming and unpredictable. A parent in crisis, a sibling in pain. And you learned that the best thing you could do was not add to it. Keep yourself small, keep yourself contained, be the one who holds it all together. Either way, the message absorbed was the same. Your emotional presence is a liability, not a gift. And that, I would argue, is one of the most painful lies that gets passed down the families. Your emotional presence, your willingness to be moved by another person is not a liability. It is the whole point. All right, let's make this actionable because I know some of you are listening to this and recognizing yourself either as Nadia or Daniel in your own story, maybe both at different moments. Are here are three things you can start doing immediately. 1. Notice your internal weather. The next time someone you love is talking to you about something that matters, check in. What are you feeling? Even if you think you should be feeling nothing, you are not sure what you're feeling, notice that. Get curious about it. The goal isn't to perform an emotion. The goal is to stop performing the absence of one. 2. Reflect feeling, not the content. Most of us have been taught that good listening means paraphrasing, saying back what someone said. Try going one layer deeper. Instead of, so it sounds like your boss dismissed your idea, try, so it sounds like you felt dismissed, like what you brought to that meeting didn't matter. You're naming the emotional experience underneath the event. That's where people live. And 3, let the pause do its work. When someone finishes saying something heavy, resist the urge to immediately respond, even with something kind and supportive. Let there be 5 seconds of silence. That silence, when it comes from someone who is genuinely sitting with what you just shared, is one of the most powerfully heard feeling experiences a person can have. We are so uncomfortable with silence that we rob each other of it constantly. I want to end with where Nadia and Daniel ended up. Because I believe in earned endings. I don't believe in fairy tales, but I do believe in real ones. It took time. It took Daniel doing a lot of uncomfortable internal work, sitting with emotions he'd been filing away since childhood, learning to tolerate not having a solution to offer, learning that being moved by Nadia's pain was not the same as being destroyed by it. And it took Nadia doing some work too, learning to recognize the difference between Daniel being emotionally absent and Daniel being emotionally present but quiet, learning to ask for what she actually needed rather than hoping he'd intuit it and resenting him when he didn't. About 4 months after that experiment in my office, Nadia told me something I wrote down in my notes because I knew I'd want to remember it. She said, I used to feel like he was listening to my words. Now I feel like he's listening to me. That's it. That's the whole thing. Words. And then the person behind the words. Most of us spend our whole relational lives being heard at the level of words, learning to offer and ask for. Something deeper than that is some of the most important work I know. If this episode stirred something in you, I want to hear about it. Where do you land in this? Are you more of a Nadia, longing to be truly heard, or more of a Daniel, realizing that your careful composure might be keeping the people you love at arm's length? There is no shame in either. The only question is, what do you want to do with it? Drop me a message. You will find me at coachswatimukherjee.com. I read everything. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, the person in your life who loves someone deeply but can't figure out why that someone still feels alone, share this episode with them. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is hand someone the exact language they have been missing. I'll be back next week with another story. Until then, go be present, really present. Take care of yourselves.